Welcome to the Care Right podcast, your go-to resource for all things elder care. Guiding us through this journey is Annalee Kruger, the founder of Care Right Incorporated, and she has been steadfastly supporting families across the United States. Each episode brings you expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical advice, ensuring that you're well equipped to provide the best possible care for your loved ones. Expect to gain valuable knowledge, learn from real-life stories, and get inspired to take action in your own caregiving journey. So buckle up as we dive into an in-depth discussion of elder care planning and together embrace the journey of caring for aging loved ones on the Care Right podcast.
Welcome everyone to Annalee Kruger with Care Right Incorporated, the Caregiver Crisis podcast. I am excited today to have another fantastic guest on our show today. This is Lance. Welcome, Lance. How are you today?
Wonderful, Annalee. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. So let me do this really great, this introduction for you. And you've got a couple of different areas that you serve families there in the Michigan area, but also across the country as well. So we're going to just hop right into this introduction and get started. So Lance has worked as a senior case manager for Enriched Life Home Care Services for 10 years. During those 10 years, he has been an instrumental part of making Enriched Life Home Care Services the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan for the past 4 years in a row and counting. During COVID, the team at Enriched Life Home Care Services wanted to find a way to help reach families and communities that were facing long-term care issues, and out of their desire to help reach families, they created All Home Care Matters podcast, which has quickly risen to become the leading voices in long-term care. That's pretty powerful stuff there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's
Yeah,
a work of passion.
it is a work of passion. That's right. That's right. So tell me more about All Home Care Matters. What is, I know that because was birthed basically through the pandemic, but tell me more about All Home Care Matters podcast.
Sure. So our company, Enriched Life Home Care Services, would do a lot of community outreach, caregiver support groups, educational seminars, just a lot of altruistic community work for senior centers, churches, senior living organizations, and just the community as a whole. And we quickly started seeing, like all of us, that, the pandemic was starting to cause a lot of shutdowns and, events being canceled and things like that. And just having a heart for helping others and trying to lift others up and just be a lending hand, we wanted to find a way that we could continue that work in some fashion. Mm-hmm. And out of that came one evening, I was listening to a podcast and decided, this might be a way that we could help continue that work. And we spent several months researching podcasts because none of us really had a familiarity with what it took to create a podcast, to launch one, and to maintain one. And so we spent several months before initially launching All Home Care Matters. And once we did, it quickly caught on with a lot of people. And it's just really become a thing of love that we enjoy doing. We get to meet wonderful people. Like we recently had an interview with you and, all these great thought leaders and influencers in the senior care industry. And it's also branched off to even parents who, have children with developmental disabilities and sharing their stories. And, in the hopes of the show, what we're trying to accomplish is reach families that are going through similar situations so that they either learn of new resources or just learn that, hey, you know what, I'm not alone. There are other people. And sometimes, as being a family caregiver and being in those situations, you kind of sometimes have tunnel vision and blinders on because you don't necessarily have the time to look into other things or try to reach out to people. And we're just trying to give them a voice and a place that they can come to learn that they're not alone.
Mm-hmm. And, in my experience as a consultant, but also as a daughter who has been taking care of her aging parents, you end up in survival mode. You're just trying to get through the day to make sure
Right.
that mom and dad have everything that they need. And I'm a business owner, obviously, so I got to tend to the business and my team and my clients. I mean, you truly do end up in survival mode, and you don't have time to do all this research and find out what resources are available. So that's fantastic that your podcast offers that.
Yeah. Well, and as with Care Right and the families that you're doing just remarkable work for and helping them through the survival mode period
Mhm.
that they're experiencing. The other thing we're trying to accomplish too is give them good information, because there's information out there, but not all of the information is necessarily good.
Right.
There are, unfortunately, the dark side of this industry where there are people out there trying to capitalize and take advantage of people's naiveness and their desperation. And we want to help steer them towards, resources like Care Right and all these other wonderful resources out there that are going to be there for them honestly and truthfully, and not take advantage of these dire circumstances that they're
Mhm.
going through.
Right. Right. And as far as feeling lonely and feeling like you're out there on your own as a caregiver, that is spot on. Like every
Right.
single one of my clients, that's exactly what they come to me presenting as, is overwhelmed, burned out caregivers, and they don't know what their care options are. They don't know how to pay for care. They think Medicare is going to pay for everything. They thought that their family, their siblings would help out more, but that didn't happen. And so, when families come to Care Right, they're in pretty bad shape. They're
Right.
pretty overwhelmed and burned out. They're scared, they're overwhelmed and pretty resentful sometimes. And that's a normal feeling too.
Sure.
Right. And so I say this every day, aging and the caregiving journey can be a positive experience for everyone if they have an aging plan in place, which means that they have enough supports in place. Like, what do you want to take off your caregiver plate? And we can outsource, we can find a resource to serve that need, like home care, like what you do on a daily basis, you and your team do on a daily basis. Tell me a little bit more about the home care piece, because I know that there are a lot of consumers out there and families out there that maybe don't fully leverage or know what all home care services can do to allow their loved one to age in place at home.
Well, absolutely. And I'm glad you asked that, because one of the biggest misconceptions about home care is that it's home health care. And there is a distinct difference, and it's pretty significant. Home health care is provided by Medicare for up to 9 weeks at a time, where Medicare will pay 100% of that cost. There are Medicare guidelines that, we can go into if you'd like, but essentially you have to be homebound, except for religious services or a haircut or medical appointments. Otherwise, you're saying, I can't leave the home. So an RN, OT or a PT will come out, social workers, and even dietitians if your specific need calls for it. And where a lot of families get confused is that they have home health care coming out once or twice or 3 times a week for that 45-minute to 60-minute visit, and that's all they're there for. And they're only there to provide for that specific healthcare need. They're not going to go into, helping mom make sure she had her meds in the morning and in the evening, helping her with bathing and dressing and, toileting and grooming, helping to make meals, all of those things that home care provides. With home health care, we work side by side with them quite often, because usually if that person is in a situation where they need home health care, they also need help with what we call the activities of daily livings, or the ADLs. So that means we can provide help and support and care up to requiring a nursing license. So everything below requiring a nursing license, we can provide for. But the nice thing about home care as well is it's not a one size fits all. Maybe your mother, Annalee, maybe she just needs some companionship for 4 hours on Saturdays so you can go to the gym, or, maybe you have appointments that you have to take care of. And we're just being there as a companion for her, helping to, stimulate her, listen to her, have conversation. If the weather's nice, maybe going for a walk if she's able. But then on the flip side, you may have somebody that needs 24-hour care, who is bedbound and is a stroke survivor and needs somebody at their side at all times. So home care really is customized around what fits that person's needs. Everybody's care is different. Everybody's schedule, meaning some people might need help Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 9 to 2. Other people might need help Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3 to 9. And that's okay. It's all built around that one specific person and what their specific needs are, which makes it very nice for families because they have full control over the care they receive and when they receive it and how they receive it.
And just to be clear for the listeners, the plan of care that you develop when you're bringing that new family onto your services into your home care family, it's not set in stone. So
Correct.
as mom's needs change or dad's needs change or the family's needs change, that plan of care can always be adjusted. You can increase hours. You can, if they're in the hospital, if someone goes to the hospital, for example, the companion can go where their client goes, right?
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
spend some time in the hospital so they're not scared and they're not there by themselves if the family can't get there. And just like if they end up needing to, a loved one needs to go into a rehab center for a period of time, you don't want to lose that great companion, right? So I always encourage families, let's bring Maria, keep Maria on your payroll, so to speak, so that you don't lose her to another family, and your loved one needs that familiarity when they're in a strange environment like a hospital or a rehab center.
Absolutely. I could not agree with that more. And, one of the really nice things about that, so going to the care plan aspect, when we initially meet with a family, we say the care plan is just kind of like reading the back of the book for the first time. You got to actually read the book to know what all the specifics and the details are. But the back of the book gives you a pretty good idea. But we don't know. And oftentimes the families also don't know because they're not living with mom or dad around the clock. They may not know certain things. So when we go through that initial care plan, that's just the initial assessment. And we go through, we ask them all these questions. It takes about an hour. And then we say, before our staff ever go out to the home, we meet with them and have a care conference with the staff who are going to be associated with your loved one. And we go through that care plan. We go through their DNR status, their medications, the whole medical history. And then once we get started, like part of my role as a case manager is we drop in at least once a week while our staff is in the home and we check in to see how things are going. But then we also have a lot of phone communication with the staff too, because you got to know how they're progressing or maybe even degressing. And then that care plan gets changed based on their abilities, either improving or not improving. And then we proceed further from that point. So yeah, a care plan is a starting point. It's not the end point. And sometimes families start with care and they need it 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, because dad just came home from having hip surgery. And as dad's continuing to improve, that he may still need the care, but it may not require 24/7 care. So we scale that care back. And then we also update and enhance the care plan. Yeah, it's kind of a living document. It's not something that gets set in stone and stays that way.
Right. And when my rule of thumb for families is when mom or dad return home from rehab or the hospital, let's load them up with home care, maybe even more than what they maybe need, but we don't know what they need because they haven't been home for a while. Maybe they've been in the ER or in the hospital for a period of time and in a rehab center. And there's nothing worse as a family member than sitting on the edge of the bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, scared because your loved one needs to go to the bathroom and you didn't think about nighttime needs, right?
Right.
We can always taper down the home care, but that's so important to make sure that they have maybe more care than what they need, but you don't know that until 3 o'clock in the morning when they have to go to the bathroom.
And I agree with that fully, because here's the other thing we tell families on top of that is it's now going to be different that mom's back home, because when she was in the rehab or she was in the hospital, she had a call light or she had people checking every so often. Once you get home, you're by yourself.
Yep.
So she may have felt like she was doing better and the family may have felt that way. And she probably is doing better because she's being discharged and being sent back home. But that care was always there as a safety net in those facilities. Anytime something came up, when you go home, that's no longer there for you. So
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons too. I know a lot of companies use contracts and they make you commit to a certain amount of time, both in the care time as well as a duration of time. And we don't have contracts. So we have a family recently, they were just needing help 3 days a week, 8 hours a day. And dad was in rehab and we were taking care of mom. Well, dad recently came home. And so now their concern was mom's now going to go back to trying to take care of dad and her
Mhm.
health won't allow her to. But, she wants to. It's her husband and we appreciate that. So they've now added 7 days and they've added midnights because of that very thing. They don't want dad to either have a fall or mom to get worn out or sick or hurt trying to
Or
help
hurt.
dad,
Yeah.
and it's a good team approach. And one of our points that we really stress to families, because again, we want to respect everyone's dignity, everyone's
Mhm.
independence. And so what we try to do is explain, we're not going in to take over and take charge. We're there to help support you, not control you and tell you and dictate to you. But we have to also make sure what you're doing is safe too. So,
Mhm.
having that extra pair of hands and those extra pair of eyes just helps the family to get a better understanding.
That's right. And, going to the example of, maybe mom was in rehab for 8 weeks. And, it's easy to get, and I'm not in love with this word, but it's easy to get institutionalized where you
Right.
have, someone is there to help you and you don't have to worry about your meals, your medications, getting to the bathroom. Well, anyway, so when they get home, it's hard to kind of get reacclimated. So it's nice to have, companions there to help you get reacclimated and, help you be as independent as possible so that you can ease back into as much independence as you can at home. But with just having some gentle reminders or at least someone there giving you that's a huge peace of mind.
Right.
And as
Absolutely.
far as, because I want to go back to your podcast as
Sure.
well, but I know that this is just helpful information for families in general to
Absolutely.
understand about home care. How, as far as like, how does home care get paid? A lot of people think that Medicare will just pay every single
Right.
long-term care expense, and that's just simply not the case.
Right. And that's again part of the confusion between the home health care and the home care. And surprisingly or not, we've actually even had nurses call us with dispos or um, discharges saying, well, no, Medicare will pay for this. And they get confused as well. And I
Mhm.
think that just goes to, being aware and understanding of what is available and what resources are and aren't covered and things like that. But we'll have families call and one time, and we never argue or try to, make a point that you're absolutely wrong. And, we try to be very understanding. And so when we get calls like that, we'll say, well, oh, gee, things do change all the time. Maybe this is something we're just not aware of.
Sure.
And we had a very wonderfully warm and loving lady once. And, the care was for herself. And she was in the beginning stages of dementia. And she called 5, 6, 7 times in a row, all in the same week. And
Mhm.
she was convinced, and she said she called her insurance provider and all this, and they guaranteed her it's covered. You know, we try to be understanding, because
Yeah.
people, it's one of those things you just don't know what you don't know, kind of like you experience with care, right? And
Yeah.
so we took her policy number down, we took the phone number down, and we called the insurance provider. And I think it's one of those cases where not everybody you get when you call in for customer support is really
Right.
understanding, what's available and understanding the insurances and things. They're just answering phones. And he said, well, no, that, we won't pay for these services. And we said, well,
Yeah.
we understand that. So I explained the situation. I said, would you mind if I got your name and if you have like an employee ID number or make a note so that we could have this family call and speak to you, because this family just called and spoke to someone else who guaranteed them. And I said, it's causing a lot of angst and anxiety and
Mhm.
frustration because they're thinking we're just not wanting to take their insurance. And he said, absolutely. So the daughter then at that point got involved and, explained it to the mother. But here's a case where this person, she was absolutely certain because she actually got that information from the insurance provider.
Right.
So unfortunately, Medicare at this time doesn't provide service coverage for these types of services. But if people have long-term care insurance, that's one avenue that they can explore if they have it. Because long-term care insurance, again, kind of like auto insurance, everybody's coverages are different. If you have the coverage for in-home care services, you may have different daily allotments of funds, but usually it will cover a good portion of home care. We have some families, they have 24/7 care and it's paid for 100% by their long-term care insurance. We have others that have a daily allotment of, say, $160, and that's what they're allowed every day for coverage. And then you have the VA has a wonderful benefit. And I want to stress that just because you're a veteran does not mean you qualify for this benefit, but it's called aid and attendance. Aid and attendance is available for wartime veterans. So they were serving and got wartime duty on their DD-214s. And then their spouse also qualifies. So even if you're the spouse of a war veteran and they're deceased or they don't need the help, you as a spouse will still qualify, which is a wonderful thing. However, that's just the first requirement. After that, then they get into what your financial situation is like. And then they look into your finances to see if then you qualify financially. And then the other way is private pay, of course. And then if you need care as a result of an auto accident, there is personal attendant services that insurances can cover if the care is a result of a car accident. Here in Michigan, that funding got severely cut, and there's a lot of legislation and a lot of battles going on with that because the funding got cut by almost 60%.
Wow.
So if a person was allotted $30 an hour, let's say, through their insurance because of their auto accident, now they're down to $18 an hour or $12 an hour. And that's been a big issue because these companies have told these families, we can no longer continue to provide the care because we're actually losing significant money by providing care for you, which leaves these poor people in just a horrendous position.
Sure.
And it's just a very difficult time for people who are getting attendant care through their auto insurance right now in Michigan. And hopefully that's going to be changing for the better very soon, because in Michigan, there's a very notable hockey player who played for the Detroit Red Wings, and that's been on the news almost monthly here.
Yeah.
And he was injured after the Red Wings won the Stanley Cup, and he's been getting attendant care for maybe close to 25, 30 years. I don't know, but he's actually become kind of the face of this movement to reverse these decisions, because like he said, my life is in jeopardy. I need to have, it's not a matter of wanting it. I need it. And so we're kind of waiting to see how that plays out. But those are really the big ways. It's either private pay, long-term care insurance, the VA through aid and attendance, if you qualify, and then auto insurance for attendant care.
Or reverse mortgages for the right fit, for the right fit.
And we all, with that, we always advise people, speak to your financial planner or speak to your family attorney, because that's a whole kind of separate ball and wax. But that is another way. If you own your house, you can explore the options that a reverse mortgage would allow you to have.
Yep. And it's not the right fit for every scenario, obviously, but it's worth, exploring if the goal is to be able to age in place at home and funding is an issue. It could potentially be worthwhile to explore the home equity, but
absolutely.
But that's, and when we talk about using a team approach, it's important to use that collaborative approach, with the VA or with the financial planner, with the attorney, using that collaborative approach to say, so this is what's happened. Dad had a major stroke. He doesn't want to go into a nursing home long-term. He just graduated from rehab. We want to bring him home. How can we all work together as a team, a care team, to make sure that we can help support him the best way possible to age in place at home, and then, work as a team. That's my approach as well. We all often have to have a care conference with the professionals, a financial care conference, so that everybody's on the same page.
If I could just add to the home care aspect, for families that may be watching or listening to this, we always recommend and advise, when you're interviewing home care companies, ask the right questions. We recommend make sure the person's not a subcontract or a temp employee, because that could create several issues down the road. You may not be protected if something happens the way you think you would be with a company. Make sure that they do drug screenings, background checks, motor vehicle checks. You want to make sure that you're protected in the event that a situation ever did arise. And in Michigan, we're a non-licensed state, so there is no regulation, unfortunately, right now over the home care industry like there would be, say, in Illinois, where, that falls under the Department of Health and Human Services, and there's certain other steps and guidelines that home care companies have to follow there. With our company, we follow as many and as much of those guidelines as we're able to with the resources available to us. But we know not all companies are practicing good business ethics and practices. And unfortunately, we hear too many stories from families who found out after the fact.
The hard way. I want to give a real life example of that, because this comes up obviously as part of the aging planning process that I do when I facilitate family meetings, because they'll often want to go the cheapest route for home care, right? Because they don't want to pay a home care company. And so we go through the pros and cons of what their decisions, what they're thinking, right? Because they'll be like, well, my good friend is a retired nurse and she's a neighbor. She can just come over and help me for a few hours a week. And she only wants, 15, 20 bucks an hour, and that's cheaper. And so we talk about the pros and cons of what that really looks like from a liability perspective. And I've had families where it was smooth sailing. They didn't have any issues. They didn't have to worry about trying to find 3 or 4 different caregivers to replace her if she wanted to go on vacation. But I've also had the flip side where families were adamant that that's, and it's their decision, however they want that to go. My job is to make sure that they're making informed decisions. And it was a family in the Midwest area, and they just found someone off of one of those, care platforms that you can go on. And I always caution people, be very careful, because especially after the pandemic with people who lost their jobs, there's anything and everything on those types of platforms. And that doesn't mean that these are people with good intentions. And so what happened is this family opted to go the route that they intended to go apparently in the first place, and they hired someone off of one of those platforms. They didn't necessarily do the due diligence that we highly recommended, and we even have interview questions, so that we know. So we train families how to interview home care companies and interview, those independent contractors. And so they went with someone that they thought they were comfortable with, and she tripped down a flight of steps carrying a basket of dirty clothes. And up north, our laundry is in the basement, right? So this home care worker, independent contractor that the family could get for cheap, she twisted her ankle when she fell down the steps when she tripped. And they're still sorting out the medical expenses and the litigation, because of course she sued. Right. So
absolutely.
So there's so much that families need to know, and you have to know the financial consequences and the legal consequences of your decisions. And we said at the top of the podcast, families don't know what they don't know until they know it. And then those lessons really stick, right?
Yeah.
When you learn the hard way.
Absolutely. That's a terrible situation to also find yourself in when you are also dealing with having to still have care for a loved one. And, then there's theft, right? We have stories where a family, this wonderful lady from their church offered to help. And next thing you know, mom's jewelry and everything is gone. And then not only theft, but then you have coverage. If you have 1 or just 2 people working together to care for mom or dad or whoever the situation may be, and they get sick, then, or, you get 6 feet of snow if you're in the Midwest and they can't get there. Now you're stuck, right? There's no backup. There's no contingency. And, there are, obviously pros where sometimes it's more affordable to go a private route, but the cost in the long run could be significantly greater, and families just need to be aware of what those risks are before, like you said, so that they can make an informed decision.
That's right. At least when you go through a legit home care company, where there are employees, yes, you pay a little bit more, but you also don't have to be the scheduler. So when Sylvia doesn't show up for her shift, you don't have to go back on to some of those software platforms and try to find a replacement, which is impossible to do quickly. So you put yourself in that position of being a scheduler and, care coordinator and patient advocate, all the stuff that's included when you just go through a legitimate home care company.
Yeah. Well, and one last I want to point out too is, things may start off really well with a private caregiver, but then let's say there is some sort of altercation or situation. Sometimes people aren't comfortable with confrontation.
Right.
Now you have to handle it yourself instead of contacting a company and having a case manager or one of their personnel address it. Now you're the one handling it. And then, it's just, there's a lot of risk. I mean, it can work and it has worked for some families, but I'm always on the side of caution, because you can't predict if somebody's going to fall down the stairs or have an accident, or let's say they accidentally injure your loved one. There's no recourse, there's no backup, there's no contingency.
I've had families go the route of paying, the neighbor person $15 an hour because they're cheaper. And then only to find out that they don't even have a valid driver's license. And then they got in a car accident with their loved one driving mom's car. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's just so much that families don't know. They don't think about all of those liabilities. And so it's just, so I thought that might be an important thing for listeners to just kind of think about, not just the day-to-day stuff, but like the liability behind some of their decisions. So as far as your podcast, what would be great for those listeners to, like, what are a couple key points that you'd like to pass on about your podcast?
So with All Home Care Matters, if you're going to listen on, the podcast itself on one of the podcast platforms, you can scroll through and find different topics. And it's wide ranging. If you go on YouTube, we have it broken up into categories. So we have one that has specifically for family caregivers. We have another category that's resources and support. Others that are related to Alzheimer's and dementia. We have some that have wonderful authors that have just remarkable books that we highly recommend families, and there's all different areas for their situation. And then we have a hospice and palliative care section. So if you're looking at hospice or you have a loved one that's going through it, there's some wonderful talkers and speakers on there that can share these different, insights and things you may not be aware of. So we really the reason we called it All Home Care Matters was to create an umbrella. There's wonderful podcasts out there that deal strictly in just caregiving or just dementia or just hospice. And we're not trying to specialize in one specific area, except we're trying to cover anything that might fall under that long-term care umbrella, because people's situations change. Today, you might be, caring for a loved one with dementia, but next month it might be a loved one with dementia who's now going into hospice, or maybe you're starting to experience that burnout or, fatigue or compassion fatigue. There's episodes that discuss that. We had a wonderful doctor on a month or two ago, and we did a wonderful 3-part series with him. His name is Dr. Edward Smink, and he wrote the book, The Soul of Caregiving. And it's this wonderful tome that isn't like your typical book. It's actually broken up into sections and different things. And he created these worksheets at the end of each chapter. Where, okay, now that you read this, now we're going to trigger some conversation, answer these questions. Wonderful 3-part series that I highly recommend for anybody that is a caregiver for a loved one.
Yeah, I've been on your website, your podcast, site and stuff. So it is helpful to have it broken down into different headings and sections and chunks, if you will, because people are overwhelmed. We know that 58% of adult kids get thrust into the role of family caregiving, and the next thing you know, it's a long-term thing, and they're like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? And so it's nice to know that there's other podcasts out there too that have just kind of something for everyone in that caregiving journey.
Yeah. And, now that you mentioned that, I will recommend another episode that when you were talking about the children, one of our most popular episodes, and this is an older one, is called When Siblings Don't Agree.
Yeah.
Because we may have all encountered this where, siblings when it comes to those kind of, I call it crunch time for mom or dad, and maybe the end is coming near. It's going to dredge up a lot of old history and
Mhm.
situations. Not always, but sadly, we found more times than not, there's going to be a lot of conflict and
Yeah.
disagreement, even from what mom should or shouldn't have for her care, where mom should or shouldn't live. Should she stay in her home? I want to move mom down to Florida with me. And, and that's not really realistic. And
Mhm.
so there's all kinds of situations. It's not a one size fits all. And that's what makes caregiving one of the most rewarding experiences, but also one of the most difficult.
Yeah. And we talk about, I say this every day, aging and caregiving can be a positive experience if they have an
Yeah,
aging plan, right? And that's what
absolutely.
we do at CareRight. And unfortunately, despite my best efforts at trying to reach families proactively and say, hey, let's talk now while things are still going relatively well, because one urinary tract infection, one fall, one pneumonia, one COVID, one everything can change the course of where your family thought you were heading with this whole aging thing. But it's so important that we have these family meetings and have a neutral third party person facilitate those. 92% of my clients come to me in crisis. 85% of those I'm doing family mediation
Wow.
alongside of facilitating their family meetings, because everybody has their own relationship with each other, their own relationship with their parent. They have their own idea of what quality of life means. They have their own idea of how progressed dad's dementia really is. They have their own idea of how their inheritance should be spent. And so most families do need to have neutral third party meetings, by someone who can help them make those informed decisions. That's one of the whole reasons I built my company in the first place, because families aren't having these
Right.
conversations on their own because they wouldn't know what to talk about in the first place.
And I would just add, I think it's, remarkable what you're doing at Care Right, because it is so greatly needed for families. But I would also say to listeners or viewers, if mom or dad are still able to, meaning they don't have any cognitive,
Mhm.
disease like a dementia or it's something along those lines, just have a conversation with mom or dad and say,
Mhm.
mom, dad, do you have your wishes laid out? What do you want to have in the event or when the day may come? That will help to save some of that conflict, not all of it, because then they might disagree with what mom or dad's wishes
Right.
are, but it's still your mom or dad's wishes and you need to respect them. But having those wishes laid out before, like you said, Annalee, before that crisis occurs and you're in the thick of it, it's going to help alleviate a lot of that stress on you and your family.
Mhm. Well, and they think about, because my client's the whole family, right? So
Right.
when I facilitate the family meetings, it's including mom and dad in those meetings, as long as they are able to participate, right? Like if
Sure.
they're demented and so forth, it's you can't bring them in on those decision making because they're too far progressed. But you know, families want to, moms and dads always want to age in place at home. Their other goal is that they don't want to be a burden on their kids, right? But yet,
Right.
who's calling me and probably who's calling you is the adult kids who are mom
Right.
and dad's assisted living. And when we talk about the adult kids, when I ask them what are their goals for their parents as their parents age, we all want a variety of the same thing. We want our parents to be happy. We want them to be safe. We want them to have the best quality of life possible and the best quality of care possible. So the only way to merge those two sets of goals is through aging planning and using that collaborative approach to say, let's make sure you have enough supports in place as a family so that you don't end up with compassion fatigue and resentful and angry and having to quit your job or take early retirement because you didn't know that there's home care companies, as an example, that could really allow your loved one and your family to have the best possible aging journey.
Right.
So, yeah. So this has been that we could literally talk all day long because we both have been doing this for a long time, and there's just real life scenarios that we can just keep kind of pumping out
Absolutely.
there to consumers. But this is such an important conversation for families, content for families to learn and understand and kind of digest. And we know that there's just so much to think about when you're that family caregiver, or you're the mom and dad and you're starting to realize maybe you're needing more help than what you had hoped. There's resources out here to help you. And Google, I promise you, Google is not the solution. So that's why I bring on, professionals who this is their passion, this is what they do. And that's why I'm so glad, Lance, that you were able to jump on
Absolutely.
the podcast today and
Yeah.
offer another solution and resources and just information for families.
I enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you having us. And I just, again, applaud you for the remarkable work you're doing, because it is so very much needed for families. It really is. So thank you for what you do, Annalee.
And likewise, we all need to lock arms and make sure these families have the best possible outcomes. So
Absolutely.
what's a great way? We've got your website, your social media, stuff like that. But if someone has, wants to reach out to you, what is your preference? What's the best way?
So they can go to allhomecarematters.com, and we always recommend people, if you have questions, if you have an idea of a topic you want to hear, or if you just want to give us feedback, there's a form right there on the homepage that they can reach out, and every form is read and answered, and it is secure.
And that podcast is for you, the consumer, the family. So
Yeah.
All of us professionals who have podcasts or services that we offer, we want to hear from you, the family, like what's important to you? What have we missed as professionals that you're sitting there scratching your head going, "Cal, I can't find any information about this, or this." So go on the website, fill out the form, make sure that, if there's content that you're looking for that you haven't been able to find reliable, accurate resources for, fill out Lance's form on his website so that he can, so that you can find a professional that can talk about that subject matter and be a reliable source for your family. So
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And
You're welcome.
Really appreciate all that you and your team are doing, and your podcast team. And it's just, we all are doing what we can to help reach these families.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for having us, and we're here anytime we can help.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Care Right podcast. We hope today's discussion has provided you with valuable insights. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with others who might find it helpful. Remember, Care Right is more than just a podcast. It's a community dedicated to supporting family caregivers with comprehensive care planning, crisis management, and resources for every stage of aging. Stay connected with us for future episodes as we continue to explore essential topics in aging planning, elder care, and financial planning. Until next time, take care, plan wisely, and remember, you're not alone in your caregiving journey.